Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Plants vs. Zombies theory. In today's episode, I'll be covering the previous 100 years before the games, and if I sound excited, it's because I am. I have so much evidence that people have never thought to connect, and there are some things here that have almost no record on the internet. I do want to warn though that this theory may get a little bit crazy, so I completely understand if you disagree with me. This is the war theory. We'll start with this newspaper that shows up in Z-Tech Factory in Zombopolis. It's dated November 13th, 1918, 2 days after the real end of World War I. It shows that the president of the US at the time is an ancestor of Dr. Zomboss, probably his grandfather. The plants had an empire of some kind, and the zombies won the war. Now, that's completely definitive, but there's a little bit more that we can assume. The plants have an empire that loses World War I, which parallels Germany, so we can assume that's where they are at the time. For the zombies, as well as being in the US, we can also assume that they're in the UK, because the official guide says that in the past there was a big enough zombie presence on the island to defeat the Vikings in 921 AD and William the Conqueror in 1066. Also, Dr. Zomboss's first name is Edgar and his middle name is George, and those names are primarily of British origin. And he has a British accent, so it would make sense if he and his family had roots there. A Zomboss being president also implies that the zombies were in control of enough territory in the US to take over the government. We still need some space for the humans, so I'll just draw a line. Anyway, as the plants were getting absolutely destroyed by the zombies, the humans didn't seem to do anything about it, because they were never mentioned in the newspaper. The plants had probably hoped that the humans would join forces with them because they shared a common enemy, but they never did. In fact, they ignored them for the whole war and eventually made peace with the zombies 3 years after the war ended. Now, I know this may sound a little bit crazy, but it's at this point that the plants realize they cannot trust anyone but each other. So they run off into hiding and found Leaf. Now, I know what you're thinking. Crazy Dave created Leaf in 2016, what the hell are you on about? And yes, I can definitely see what you mean. However, there's this one line from DaveBot 3000.1 that says Leaf was founded before the mid-1980s. Now, I'll get to the actual thing that he's talking about here later, but in the mid-80s, Dave was 10 to 14 years old. No matter how crazy Dave is, I just don't think that it's in character for him while he's thinking about parade floats all day to found a plant agency. So I think the most logical time for Leaf to be founded is by runaway plants after the only other dominant races on the planet make peace. It would also explain why they're so secretive, not showing up again for almost 100 years, only allying with the humans after the creation of the Plant Appreciation Society, which we see in Battle Extravaganza. Nothing noteworthy happens until 1968, when a young woman named Barbara Johns begins to see zombies as a bit of a problem.
Hello, this is me from the future, and I'm here because I forgot to explain who Barbara Johns is. So, the only time she ever shows up at all in the franchise is in the very last page of the official guide. So, pause if you want to read. So basically, this is pretty much all of the 100% canon information we have on Barbara Johns, but she is such an important character because she founded the company that makes the plants. So pretty much all other information we have on Barbara is completely theorized, but, you know, given her line of work, there's a lot of things that we can kind of deduce that she did in the franchise. We will now return to your regularly scheduled programming.
So, either as a safety precaution or just because she's racist, or both, she starts looking at defense mechanisms against them. Now, as far as humans knew at the time, all the plants were either imprisoned or killed by the zombies, so she didn't really have much to go off of. She is a botanist though, so she tries to genetically engineer them back into existence. She doesn't exactly restore them to their original form. They can't even walk, but they still work for defensive purposes. So she founds Bloom and Doom Seed Company, which sells her seed packets to people. The next thing to happen is the Zombie War in 1976. The only mention of it is in Imitator's Almanac entry, and he's not very specific, so we don't know much. The real US was not in any conflict at the time, so unfortunately we can't draw any parallels to real life. However, we can still assume things based on the surrounding events. First of all, Barbara Johns was likely a participant in the war, as well as her brother, as the war is the only context where his last words would be, "They're coming for you." As for what actually happens in the war, peace theories don't exist, so it was probably a difficult fight. So much so that the zombies win, which would lead into Neon Mixtape Tour and PvZ 2. Now, this would mean that the war could have ended anywhere in the 1980s, but I'll put it in the early 80s for the sake of the rest of the timeline. The next thing that happens is the science fair upset. This is a newspaper that depicts a young Zomboss crying next to a young Crazy Dave winning the science fair, a pea shooter in hand. Zomboss also wrote the word cheat on it. Now, that's all the information that we have in-game, but I swear to God, in the now-cancelled Garden Warfare theme park, there was a higher detailed version of this texture with fully readable text, and there are only like 3 photos of it on the internet. Yes, this is real, it's on the Carowine's Flickr account. So we know that Zomboss's invention had something to do with spiders, and it was disqualified for quote-unquote violating the spirit of the competition. Zomboss thinks that the judges were biased, and I think he was absolutely right, given the fact that the head judge was a plant. Crazy Dave's invention is a pea shooter, which we've already established didn't exist in the 70s, so Barbara Johns likely buys the patent from Dave so she could use it in her company. As for when all this happens, they seem to be in middle school, so I'll just say they're 12. This would put it around 1985. The final thing that happens before the games is Party Citron, Party Rose, and Party Corn partying so hard that they break reality, which sets up Infinity Time in Garden Warfare 2. DaveBot isn't specific about when in the mid-80s this happened, but I'll just put it in 1987 to distance it as much as I can from their cousins losing a war. So we have all of the events of the past mapped out, so what does this add to the main timeline? First of all, in last episode, I promised to explain the gap in the plant's power level between the classics and the shooters because I see that as a bit of a plot hole. So my explanation is that sometime in 2013 or 2014, Crazy Dave and Barbara Johns meet up and try to do what Barbara couldn't do alone in 1968, recreate the plants from World War I. And it works. They invent some kind of super plant food or something, and they completely restore them to their former glory and start making armies of them, which leads into Garden Warfare 1. And there's actual evidence that this meetup happened. I'm gonna sound so absolutely insane saying this, but in the plant base, in the backyard battleground, there is an even number of lawn chairs. And on top of the house, there are 2 chairs next to 2 golf clubs. There is obviously someone else living here other than Dave. Why not Barbara? As for the zombie's sudden boost in strength, I'd like to cite an Engie-Man theory, which says that the Zomboss energy drink Champ Brain that shows up across both Garden Warfare games is why the zombies got so strong too. I also think that both of these inventions are made with the mysterious green and purple energy that everyone's always fighting over across the shooter games. It would make sense that it gives them a reason to be fighting over it all the time. The final implication on the main timeline is that Barbara Johns is still kicking around in 2019, in the form of Barb's Botanical Baffler, because, you know, she's a botanist.
Hey guys, I know this seems like an outro, but please don't leave, I have some important things to say. First of all, I want to thank some people. First is Itsy, Bitsy, the engineer main, who made the theory about Champ Brain that I kind of admittedly stole for this one. Secondly, Frankie on Twix for letting me use their Barbara Johns design. And third is Viksochan, who let me use the Garden Warfare version of Rigor Mortis for that part with the lawn chairs. I also want to thank all of you for support on part 1. It's gotten way more views and comments than I ever thought it would. And I'm just glad I'm reaching people. I'm hoping I can, make someone want to make content like I did. And yes, I know it's been a while. For the past 6 months, I've basically been walking around I seem to have misplaced my motivation. I wonder where it is. Where could it be? Yeah, I'm sorry for the wait. Also, I know this theory is nowhere near as believable as my first one. It's more of, there's a lot of shots in the dark in this one, but I do think that whether or not what I'm saying here is true, it does hold weight, The entire PvZ franchise wasn't made by one person, so not all of it is going to be completely easily connectable, so it's not like one person definitely intended for everything I said in this video to be true. That's definitely not the case. However, if we combine the ideas of the timeline of multiple people who worked on the franchise over the years, from Paul Tobin to George Fan to whoever designed that one object that has the newspaper on it, you can combine people's interpretations of what they wanted the story to be to make something like what this theory was. And if you disagree with me, please argue with me vehemently in the comments. More comments means more engagement, which means more views. And lastly, part 3 will be coming eventually. It'll be about the kind of geography of PvZ, where everything is, but I may make some different stuff in between then. So if you see a random skit in your notifications, then that's why. Alright, see ya. Like, subscribe, comment, share, whatever. Let's shoot for 5 months this time.